Yeah, so it's quite an exciting growth sector. It's also, at this particular point in time, one of the most talked about sectors, I would have thought, within planning context, because we're at a crisis point in terms of the environment.
The Environment Bill, will be mandating biodiversity net gain in planning permissions. You'll need to have a 10% uplift in your biodiversity at the site.
That's what you're trying to create for people, is an environment that they don't forget and that they want to keep on returning to, particularly in the hospitality industry, because it's that returning and recommendation that kind of then creates traction for it to grow.
Hello and welcome to the Glampy Tech podcast. Today we're joined by Pete Wharton and Matt Wall of Wharton Natural Infrastructure Consultants. We had a really good chat on why glamping site owners should care about the environment, what they can do to preserve the surrounding natural areas and wildlife, and also the Environment Bill, which is a proposed piece of legislation that all prospective glamping site owners will need to be aware of if implemented. These guys are the absolute experts when it comes to biodiversity, ecology, and all things environmental. So this episode will be of particular value to anyone who has a similar interest in those subjects and wants to implement them in their glamping site. As always, I hope you find it useful and don't be afraid of getting in touch if you have any further questions. So you guys are at Wharton Natural Infrastructure Consultants, which according to your website is a company that are topographical surveyors, tree and ecology consultants and landscape architects. I know I personally don't have a clue what half of that means. So for the benefit of me and the audience, would you mind just giving a brief rundown of what you do as a business, really, in simple terms?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah, thanks for having us on today, Nick. It's a real pleasure to kind of be speaking to you on this podcast. So Wharton Natural Infrastructure, we're in essence, we're environmental consultants, and we specialize in looking, I suppose, in the simplest terms, at anything that moves, whether it be creepy crawlies or grows in terms of trees and plants. We do topographical surveys, as you said, so that's looking at kind of what the state of land is at that current particular time. And then we assess trees and ecology, primarily to aid development, but also to enhance development. And then the landscape element is really the design work that comes afterwards in terms of creating semi-natural and natural environments where people want to live, work and play.
So, Pete, you're the director and founder, I believe. So could you just give us a run through of what you do, and then afterwards, Matt, what you do specifically at the business?
Yeah, so I founded the business in 2008, 3 weeks before the previous recession, which we weren't to know about at that point in time. So going through the current kind of COVID pandemic is not a completely new experience in terms of the recession part. We founded it purely in 2008 for arboriculture, so looking at trees mainly in the urban setting. And it then developed and grew fairly kind of organically to then encompass ecology, and ecology and trees fit very well together, to start employing people around about 6 years ago. And we've grown the business now to, we've actually just appointed a new person today who's accepted a job. So that takes us up to 10 people at the company. Yeah, so it's quite an exciting growth sector. It's also, at this particular point in time, one of the most talked about sectors, I would have thought, within planning context, because we're at a crisis point in terms of the environment, and the company's ethos is really how do we look at improving the environment to create better places ultimately. And I'm sure yourself, Nick, and Matt, and most other people will have only appreciated the green space that they're surrounded by at this point in time, and how we use it, which is different probably to what we used it 6 or 12 months ago. So yeah, so my main focus is really driving the business, growing it, and ensuring that the team kind of really functional.
Nice. And you, Matt?
Yeah, so I'm senior ecologist and team leader for the ecology team. I primarily work with sort of housing developers, commercial developments, all kinds actually, and effectively make sure that they're complying with all the relevant wildlife legislation and planning policy. So looking at things like protected species, bats, grey-crested newts, all the things developers don't want to hear. and things like breeding birds and that sort of thing, and also protected habitats and wildlife sites, that sort of thing. So it's quite interesting work. Get out to see some really, really interesting things, and then sort of have to convey the interesting things you found to your clients and let them understand exactly what the implications of that are. But yeah, so I've been doing it now for just over 8 years. Started with Wharton about 4 years ago, and I've just sort of run the ecology team since then. We've grown to a team of 3 now. Looking to hire again, hopefully early this year. But yeah, it's going really well so far. I think we're growing really well, and we're getting some really interesting clients and really interesting projects too. So hopefully we can talk about those.
So clearly both yourselves and the business as a whole are driven massively by a passion for the environment and sustainability and biodiversity. Starting with Pete and then going on to Matt, where did that passion come from?
For me, it started and when I was 16 as a complete accident. But I think if you speak to any arboriculturalist anywhere, they haven't got into the industry on purpose. There's no real direct route into the industry, which is something that as an industry we are working on. My inherent passion probably came from a very young child of climbing trees, falling out of trees, getting dirty and not having computers to play on, which is slightly different to now. Yeah, so I started climbing, and I think that's where the excitement comes from, isn't it? When you see tree surgeons swinging around in trees, it looks pretty fun, and it's a great career, and kind of you end up growing that passion, and just getting things done correctly. And then I moved into the more kind of office-based role of surveying, and also writing reports for local government and then private consultants as well. So I think there is an inherent passion there, and I think everybody within the company probably also has that inherent kind of passion. I can already see that being instilled into my children as well, who are fairly similar to myself, in terms of climbing trees and everything else.
And Matt, where did your passion start for the environment?
Pretty young again, I think. Probably from my mum and dad taking me around sort of National Trust places and walks and things when I was a kid. I've got vivid memories of walking through grasslands, finding little shield bugs, and then my mum would pull out this Collins Gem book of bugs, essentially, bugs and insects, and we'd go through it and see what insect it was. So yeah, I think that from an early age, I've always been interested in wildlife and the outdoors. And like Pete said, there was a cherry laurel at the bottom of my garden when I was growing up, and I'd be climbing that most days, trying to see how high I can get. Causing my mom all kinds of headaches, I'm sure. But yeah, I've just always been, I wasn't one of those kids where, you hear a lot of outdoors people saying, oh, I didn't really fit in at school, I didn't do too well, but I always wanted to be outside. I was all right at school. I didn't find school that bad. But I always knew I wanted to be outside. So yeah, I think ecology, I just sort of ended up going from A-level biology and then looking at uni, did the course in conservation, and then did a master's. So yeah, my mum and dad are pretty much to blame. I'm sure Steve Irwin and David Attenborough have got a bit to be responsible for as well. But yeah, it's just that sort of mum and dad getting me outside and appreciating outdoors from that early age, I guess.
That's quite interesting as well. I think we're seeing, particularly in the pandemic at the moment, a lot more families spending time outside, and I wonder how much more influence that will have on the next generation of people coming through, actually, who have a complete respect for the environment as opposed to destroying it ultimately. I think there's going to be a lot more people thinking, well, actually, it's really important that we do look after what we've got. So I think there's going to be a lot of benefit from the pandemic for that. It's a similar thing, I think, that happened in every crisis. Something positive will come through from it. And I was only discussing this with somebody the other day, where you look at how the NHS formed. It was through a crisis, and I wonder whether the pandemic will create that need for better environments.
Absolutely. So I can, when you were both talking about how you became passionate for these sort of issues, I can see you both smiling, and it's almost, it's quite infectious when you're talking about it, when you're clearly so passionate about it. Why should glamping site owners in particular, or anyone in the hospitality industry, have a similar passion about it? And why should they care so much about the environment?
actually being a kind of a passionate camper myself, having a camper van and tents and everything else, it's something that I've done for years and we do as a family now. And actually part of camping, I think, to a lot of people is actually getting and reconnecting to nature. And it's not about just going into the biggest field you can find and pitching a tent wherever you can do. It's really kind of, you want to be surrounded by a well-managed kind of environment. And I think there's a real inherent connection between the two things. So kind of you go onto some sites and you might find there's a lot of concrete and a lot of roads and everything else, but actually it could be so much better. So I think there is that reconnection. There's also the whole thing around it becomes a completely relaxing environment. And that's ultimately, I would have thought from glamping, that's what you're trying to create for people, is an environment that they don't forget and that they want to keep on returning to, particularly in the hospitality industry, because it's that returning and recommendation that kind of then creates traction for it to grow. So I think there's a huge thing around actually the setting of somewhere. I know personally, if I want to go for a city break, then I'll go and find a built up city with good architecture because I want to go and see that. If I want to go into the countryside to go camping or glamping, I want to be in really good surroundings with nature.
Nice. And Matt, any thoughts on why you think it's so important that people care about the environment with a particular slant on glamping?
Yeah, I think broadly to echo Pete's point, really, I think, you don't go glamping to go walking around the shops, do you? You broadly go glamping because you want to be outside, you want to reconnect with nature, you want to see some interesting natural things, go for nice woodland walks. And I think, glamping site owners and people who are looking to develop those have a bit of a responsibility to make sure that the natural area that they're putting their business on, which are, that you're essentially profiting from the natural world and people wanting to explore that, you've got a real opportunity there to do the best that they can to really reconnect people with nature, have some really interesting, there's a couple of glamping sites I've seen recently where they've got some bird hides and things like that. So there's habitat around the corner that's really good for birds. So they encourage bird habitat. If you know what you've got on your site or what you've got around there, then you can create some really good opportunities for people to get that passion that I got when I was a young kid, and really get them to engage with nature. I think that's one of those critical things that glamping can provide.
Yeah, nice. I mean, a common theme between both your answers there is that it is one of the best things about glamping, if it's done right, is that it is situated right in the natural world, as opposed to just a bit of grass isn't really enough. A bit of grass on some form of playing field isn't really glamping. It's being able to be close to the animals, the plants, and all that sort of thing. How do you ensure that let's say you want to set up a glamping site? How do you ensure that it is an authentic natural experience rather than something artificial? And how do you preserve the surrounding ecology of the place?
I think it goes back to the point that Matt was making earlier on, is it's the baseline data. It's understanding and actually also having kind of that collaborative approach in terms of a team. So it's having somebody who understands the ecology, it's understanding what trees are there and actually what do they look like now, what they're going to look like in 10, 20 years time. And then it's also understanding the landscape that you've got right in front of you and it needs to be a landscape led approach. So then you're basically, it's almost as though you're dropping your glamping pods into what is already there and they're almost concealed by the landscape. I would have thought would create a fairly special atmosphere. I've been to a few of these sites and when they get it right, it not only is it a much nicer place to go to, but it's also you can charge more to be there ultimately, which is probably fairly important to the business part of it as well. But I think it's that baseline data. Would you say on that as well, Matt?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, in terms of being able to enhance the surrounding environment, it falls largely down to site selection and how flexible you are in the design. I think if you have a site in mind and you've got a fixed design, then if we then have to try and work around that design. Whereas if there's a site that's selected and you say, we want to put X number of pods on here, we can work around and find the least environmentally damaging option, in essence. And then also identify those areas where you've potentially got more, ecological interest, that the users of the site ultimately will want to be engaging with, and how best you can enhance those opportunities through sort of proactive management, and also visitor management as well. There are some habitats where you might not want people trampling all over it, but you still want to encourage that connection to it. So it's just how you go about managing those sort of potential conflict areas, and really sort of identifying from that earliest stage what you've got, and where you can put things and what you can enhance. So it's, critically really sort of site selection, and flexibility in design approach, I think, are the two key points.
Well, I'm no planning expert, but I'm trying to imagine what the planning experts at Glamprotect will be saying if they're in my position now. And I imagine it is more difficult to get planning permission on the really green areas with, maybe where they're running conservation programs and things like that. So first of all, is that the case? And second of all, if it is, how do you go about adapting to that and trying to get planning permission for those sort of areas?
I mean, obviously, if you've got an area of land that's of a higher conservation value, then it is going to be more difficult to get, change of use and glamping pods and things on that site, because the environmental impact is going to be higher. There are obviously ways to work around it in terms of your construction methods. So how are you gonna install the pods, and also it's about whether you can offset any impacts to another area by enhancing that area. So this will come on to what we're talking about in terms of biodiversity, and again in the environment bill later. But if you're going to have an impact, ideally, you will need to avoid impacts to things like irreplaceable habitat. So if you've got ancient woodland and things like that, then obviously those sort of areas are no go for development. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't encourage visitors to enjoy those areas. You just have to make an assessment of what habitats you're going to be affecting with the pods and the construction and things like that, because obviously the construction footprints with plant machinery and things could be a lot bigger than your actual your glamping pod footprint. So you just need to be mindful of how you're going to construct things, have a really rigorous approach to minimizing that impact as best as you can, and then ultimately try and provide a site. And this falls into the landscaping detail element to an extent. What's this site going to look like? So we might have some relatively moderately important habitats, but in the long term, through proactive management of the site, you can end up with some really good environmental schemes.
So just before we move on to the discussion of legislation, is there anything else, Pete? I think you wanted to say one more thing on advice that you would give to glamping site owners or prospective glamping site owners when it comes to making sure that their sites are eco-friendly.
Yeah, I think it's about planning and actually looking at what is the 5, 10, 15-year plan for a site. Because if you're looking to make a glamping site simply just to make some cash relatively quickly, because it's the trendy thing to be doing at the moment is going glamping, there's going to be a lot more staycations, then in terms of the environment, it's going to have less impact. But I think if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective, there are certain sites that I know of where they really look at it and they implement it over a period of years. So they might choose one thing each year to go and improve. And actually, through having a plan behind it, they can kind of budget for it and actually make the whole place look completely different over a period of time and make huge benefits to the environment. I think, as we've already said, like glamping is so inherently linked with nature that I think you do need the plan behind it and to identify exactly what you want to achieve from the site. And I think part of that process is engaging with the right person. So having an ecologist from the outset, having a landscape architect from the outset, because without those things, actually, you're left in a bit of an unknown, and either it's going to get questioned when it goes through planning, and you're going to have to redesign everything anyway, or you could just do it straight away and actually make it a far more beneficial place. It's going to command, I suppose, ultimately a better footfall and also more higher prices.
And I imagine, well, it's the vast majority of your drive to do this is the moral aspect of protecting the environment. But I suppose glamping site owners can also use it as a selling point, really, if they do a really good job of preserving the surrounding area and just in general protecting the environment and biodiversity. It will appeal to people who are particularly passionate about those sort of things, of which there are more and more people as we move forward. So, almost as a good marketing tool, just say, look, we really do care about the environment, and those who are similar should come and stay with us.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
if you look at the Knepp estate, for example, massive rewilding scheme, the biggest rewilding scheme in the UK. They're one of the biggest conservation attractions now in the UK, and they've got wild camping down there, and it is really successful. It's a book that was published by Isabella Tree, called Wilding. I don't know if either of you have read it, but really good book. Recommend any of your listeners to have a read of it. Talks about how they've basically taken agricultural land that wasn't particularly productive into what is, like I've already said, one of the biggest rewilding schemes in the UK, and how successful it is as a commercial enterprise as well. So the two can coexist, and it's just making people aware that they don't have to be mutually exclusive. It can be a really big selling point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think and I think a lot of these places kind of rely on kind of really up-to-date information in terms of how they promote their kind of areas where you're going to stay. So many of them are using social media as basically their main platform. And actually the best pictures come from, I know there's a place in Mid Wales called Forest Fields, which is a site we regularly go to, but most of their work is done looking through nature towards either their glamping pods or the camper vans that are on the site, what have you. And actually it's just a huge selling point, and it doesn't matter what time of year. And I think in terms of that whole seasonality of what nature brings as well, there are different parts of time where you might say, well, if you've got like a particular bat roost or something like that within the area, and you're going to see it at certain times, then you could actually almost promote that as a thing to be doing at the site. Or whether it's nesting birds, as Matt said, whether it be a deer population or wild flowers and what have you. So you can actually use it as a seasonality element because people will have certain interests. So I think there's a huge potential really to push as a nature-based thing.
So moving on to a proposed piece of legislation that's going through at the minute, the Environment Bill. I believe it's been delayed a few times and put on the back burner because of COVID and various things. Matt, I think you're the expert on this. Could you give us a run through of I think you're specialising in the biodiverse elements of it, and what it means in general, but also what it means specifically for people like prospective glamping site owners who want to set up a glamping site, what it will mean for them and their plans.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of key element of the Environment Bill that I deal with or will be dealing with is biodiversity net gain, which it's essentially the principle of leaving a site or project in a better condition for biodiversity than when you started. So it's trying to find ways to enhance that natural environment. And the Environment Bill, will be mandating biodiversity net gain in planning permissions. You'll need to have a 10% uplift in your biodiversity at the site. It's basically measured through a metric, which is a spreadsheet for all intents and purposes. So you look at what habitats you have at the site before you start, and then they're attributed essentially values based on their sort of rarity and their condition. And you end up with a number at the end of that assessment. And what you need to do is then calculate what habitats you're putting in as part of your development, what you're going to be managing and things like that, and how you're going to achieve that 10% uplift. So it is essentially, it does come down to numbers, but there are other elements in that, in terms of looking at, how you're going to improve things for species and habitat connectivity and all that sort of thing. So it will be mandated. They're looking, I think, later this year. I think it's summer now. They're looking for the bill to get royal assent, and there will be a 2-year transition period. So sort of summer 2023 is when it will come into effect. There will need to be local planning authorities will have a bit of an uphill struggle, I think, some of them trying to implement all the things that need to be done to facilitate that. But essentially, it will mean that there will be a condition which requires a biodiversity net gain plan to be submitted. So that's something that they really need to be aware of. And getting an ecologist in. I know I'm an ecologist, so it sounds like I've got a bit of a vested interest in this. But it is going to be fundamental, because there will be, if you can't deliver net gain on your site or on your land ownership, there will be financial implications for it, because it'll end up being, financial contributions to create habitat elsewhere. And I think this is where, glamping developers have a really good opportunity, because quite often there's land available. It's either within the ownership of the applicant, or you're on a site where you won't be developing all of it for glamping pods. Some of it will be, where you'll have woodland or things like that. So it goes back to what Pete was saying, in a way, in terms of having a management plan, because it will need to be secured for a minimum of 30 years, any biodiversity net gain habitats. So it gives that long-term view for landowners, right, and developers, right? What habitats have we got? How are we going to manage them? How much is that going to cost us? Because 30 years of management, when you look at it as a single figure, it could be quite big. So it's having that understanding of financial contributions for management and upkeep and habitat creation. It's going to be quite a big consideration, and getting people in early to look at what you've got before you start looking at plans and things is going to be really critical for developers.
And do you see it being a net positive thing, I assume, for the environment as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it's done correctly, and all the relevant pieces, secondary legislation and the tools that developers need are all in place, I think it's going to be really positive for biodiversity. Everyone's aware of the decline and how important it is to try and get us back from the brink, essentially. And I think this can only be a positive thing. If people are every development has to improve by 10%, that could be, in the long term, that could be massive.
Right, and so with this new environment bill, there's the possibility of glamping sites or anyone potentially buying, is it biodiversity credits?
Yeah, so if obviously it's a slightly complex issue, but if the glamping landowner, for example, has a plot of land that they're not using for development, and it's essentially spare land that they're not utilizing, they can look at speaking to their local planning authority and contributing that habitat towards habitat creation for net gain in that district or in that county. And that can potentially be a stream of income for the landowner, because they'll find out what they've got, what they can create in that area, have a chat with the local planning authority about what sort of costs that would look like. And then if a developer in the area can't achieve net gain on their site and they need to buy credits somewhere else to get that net gain, then that land can form part of that credit purchase effectively. So it could also be a stream of income for landowners as well that's worth thinking about.
So finally, Pete, you started a podcast at a similar sort of time to us. You got a similar number of episodes out. It's called Nature's Architects. So could you just give us a rundown of what that is and who might be interested in that, please?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction on that. Yeah, so we started it at the start of this year after a lot of procrastination on my part. But it's called Nature's Architects, and it's a theme that runs through it, because actually nature doesn't really have a voice. And so we kind of see ourselves as the architects for them, to enable people to develop around them, retain important natural infrastructure, but also enhance it as well. And it's really aimed at anyone who has an interest in trees, ecology, landscape design, particularly from a planning perspective. So where you get the natural world and built environment working together. So we interview and speak with planning consultants, architects, ecology professionals, tree professionals, landscape architects. So it's quite an interesting topic, and it kind of leads to anywhere, and it can be anything from health and well-being and the impact trees and natural environment has on health and well-being, through to looking at major development and infrastructure schemes and the impact that they have on the environment and how we can enhance it. So that's probably a fairly good overview of what we're discussing on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll put links to that podcast in the description. We're all friends here, so
great.
No rivalry.
And we're looking forward to getting you guys onto our podcast as well to kind of understand a bit more about Glamprotect themselves and actually what you're doing and how it works with what the natural environment really.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Glamprotect podcast. Don't forget to leave a rating and review, and we look forward to seeing you next week.